morning. Professor Raghuram, it's a delight to see you again. Mr. Jose, I think it's the third time that we're meeting. I've had the pleasure of receiving students from the IIM Bangalore over the past 2 years, and each time it's been a great pleasure to see young people from India, a country that has 600 million people below the age of 25. And so it's no wonder that you, the future of India, are taking interest in what is happening globally. Now, I've been asked to speak at very short notice for about half an hour, and as you know, it's always a tall order to stand up here without any kind of preparation or anything particular in mind to try and gas for the next 30 minutes. And lest you all think that diplomats gas all the time, I must tell you that we also do a fair bit of hard work in our profession. There was a time in the late 1950s and 60s when a joke was going around the United Nations at the time when US permanent representative to the UN was Adlai Stevenson. And that joke was that the life of a diplomat essentially is comprised of three things: protocol, alcohol, and geritol. Geritol, of course, being a food supplement, and since most diplomats were already reckoned to be on their last legs, rather elderly, geriatric people, geritol was also part of their daily routine. In the 70s, we had a similar joke in India, and I'm sure Professor Raghuram recalls a very iconic foreign secretary that we had, Mr. T.N. Call. And since he was a man who made his presence known all over the Indian establishment, the joke was that the life of a diplomat essentially is comprised of three things: alcohol, protocol, and tea and call. Not necessarily in that order, but that is simply to tell you that on a typical day like this, we not only address students from premier institutes such as IIM Bangalore, but we also do a fair bit of work. Let me tell you what we did yesterday and what we're going to do today, just as a primer. Now, we had, for instance, over the past 2 days, the finance minister and the health engineering minister from Assam leading a large delegation here in keeping with the kind of interest that India is generating in Japan and vice versa. And notably, our own interest to see that the Japan-India engagement is broad-based and is not limited to Nimrana, Bombay, Gujarat, Chennai, but we also need to have development and engagement go towards the eastern half of India to cover states that were earlier known as the Bengaluru states, but which actually are very strategically located with great natural resources. So we've actually been working on visits like that over the past several months, including at the level of chief ministers. This afternoon, for instance, I am told at again short notice that I have to address another event, business event. It's an entrepreneurship seminar organized by FICCI in tandem with one of the global promoters. Let me come back to the theme of business, what is happening around the world. Let me begin by a few random thoughts this morning. And the first thought that strikes me is that we live, as we all know, with this buzzword, globalization today. Now, globalization in its very simplistic analysis today comprises of a number of factors. It is characterized by the free flow of goods and services, technology, capital, and I dare say even ideas. And this has been the trend over the last 200 years or 300 years. Globalization has played a role in empire building. It has always been fundamental to war and peace and matters of security. If you look at the history of India, the history of Southeast Asia, you are aware that the first presence of European powers was also manifested as a result of their trading interests. And so we've lived with this process of globalization from the time of the Thucydides trap, but more manifest today over the last 200 or 300 years with the kind of connectivity that's been building up. And in the contemporary age, we can also say that on all these counts, there has also been disruption. There has been progress and there has been disruption. For instance, if you were to look at, let's say, fast forward to the frame today and say, what has the prolific circulation through the veins of the global economy of goods and services done, you will find a number of positives. But you'll also find the fact that it has been disruptive in nature. Today, for instance, if you look at China and its meteoric rise over the last 25 years, you find that China as a factory for the rest of the world, for the global economy, has to some extent been disruptive in nature. The kind of low-cost, high-volume manufacturing that it generated ended up hollowing out a lot of the global economy, notably in developing economies. We have seen it in the power telecom sector. If you look at, for instance, services, the thought strikes me that it has been seen as disruptive. Many people have referred off and on to the fact that India, for instance, a country that is capable of providing services to the rest of the global economy, has been disruptive in taking away jobs. Take technology. Today the buzzword again is alongside globalization to speak of disruption. And in technology we have seen the fastest advancement of disruptive technologies and progression also. We today are fond of saying that we are dealing with the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution took place when the first machines were invented. The second industrial revolution, when some more sophisticated machines and the light bulb and the steam engine and other things were invented. And then the third industrial revolution is the age, the digital age, the information technology age, which might have begun in the late 70s with small, calculators and slightly bigger calculators manufactured by Texas Instruments, and then it goes on to by year Y2K, allowing a country like India to become a powerhouse also in IT. There too, for instance, you have a chance to see that now we are moving to the fourth industrial revolution, which is a combination of all these. You're talking now about artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. You're trying to bring platforms together, whether it is biotechnology, whether it is military technologies. And so when we look at the surge in industrialization, again, you find that there is a great deal of scope for disruption. Now, disruptive technologies today range from, for instance, in the cyberspace, you have disruptive technologies which threaten to hollow out anything that you might be creating by way of the parallel process of IoT and the fourth industrial revolution. You've always got to keep at the back of your mind how this is going to pan out over the next 10, 20 or 30 years, with cyberspace being so challenged by state and non-state actors. There always being the challenge of attribution, of anonymity. You take then the question of capital as an adjunct of globalization, again coursing through the veins of the global economy. There too there is disruption. You have Bitcoin, a phenomenon which is to be seen around the world. You have the problem of terrorism being financed by such finance, unaccounted for funds flowing through, again, the global economy. You have unaccounted wealth, which is not a phenomenon that India alone is dealing with. Even the United States and other people around the world, the UK, are waking up to newspapers which rattle off names of very important and dignified people who have accounts all over the world. And so there is disruption to capital also. There is disruption to capital, in my view, because of the nature of wealth which has now been redistributed in the last 10, 20, 30 years in the global economy. With the trade imbalances, for instance, that the United States has with a country like China, given its rise over the last 30 years, you find that about $350 billion worth of US adverse trade balance is resulting in a siphoning off of wealth every year. Capital today, you can see, is also disruptive in the nature of connectivity projects, or for instance the definition of infrastructure around the world, in our region as well. Now you can see it as a part of globalization, but you can also see it as disruptive in nature, because if that kind of capital and wealth is being put into connectivity and infrastructure with an eye to hardwiring the region for strategic gains, and not having adequate transparency, financial responsibility, viability in projects, not having enough openness in the conduct of these ports and airports and other infrastructure, not having enough of latitude there for the borrower to be able to pay back these enormous loans that attract interest rates of usurious interest rates of 7 or 8%, then that is also capital as part of globalization, but with a very disruptive phase. So I have mentioned to you how capital, technology, goods and services are an integral part of the process of globalization, but also very disruptive. Ideas too are a part of globalization and can also be very disruptive in nature. The very fact that we are today moving into digital space where passwords are more important than passports. We are moving into a digital age where sitting at one end of the world, you can actually brainwash people in another part of the world, whether it is radical ideologies or thoughts, or the dark cyberspace that exists today. All this means that knowledge and ideas, which are integral to the progress of human society and economies and the process of globalization, also has a very disruptive phase. Now, in this broad construct, where do we find India and Japan today? I would say that when you, as young people, come to this country, you should be in a position to recall what Swami Vivekananda said way back, more than 100 years ago, after his visit here in 1893, on his way to Chicago for the World Conference of Religions. He had stopped by in Yokohama here and familiarized himself with this country. And he had then said 10 years later in an epistle, a letter that he wrote to the son of a friend of his, he had said that Japan is such a country that I'd like to see every young person from India who visit Japan once in his lifetime. Those being the days, he didn't say her, lifetime. Times have changed today, so glad to see that our youth is represented across the board. But the key point that he made was that the youth of India should come to Japan and see for themselves how much Japan has achieved. And as you all know, Japan, after the Meiji restoration, decided to go the way of the West in terms of industrialization. Despite having a very old and ancient civilization, millennial civilization, they decided that the way to go was to industrialize rapidly. By the time you get to the end of the 19th century, and when Swami Vivekananda came here, and subsequently we have Rabindranath Tagore, who came here on a number of occasions, Japan was already a very big military power. And its industrial strengths were also visible to all. Their discipline, which is so well known today, was also quite clearly abundant in society even then. And so it is that this country has achieved what it has since then. It today still remains, notwithstanding China's rise, remains the world's second largest developed economy. And it is in a class of its own in terms of technologies, in terms of the kind of processes that it has. I am actually convinced now that the model that China has followed in terms of its own industrial development has been heavily borrowed from the Japanese model. It is not just that Japan played alongside the United States of America a very key role in the rise of China. That is a fact. Over the last 35 to 40 years, it is Japanese technology, Japanese supply chains, Japanese companies, Japanese ideas, Japanese processes that have actually, alongside US technology, processes, investments, implanted the seeds of economic development and progress in China. And China continues to look to Japan for the next quantum jump in its own development. So we are basically dealing with a country that has immense potential, that has since the 1980s remained relatively stagnant in terms of its economic growth. It went through its own halcyon days in the from the late 50s to the late 1970s, when the Japanese economy also grew at a very rapid rate, almost 9% or so. And we have seen that cycle of 30 years being available to other countries also, like Korea and to China. So we are at a stage where Japan today has enormous potential. It is one of the world's most advanced economies. It has about $7 trillion or $8 trillion worth of wealth on which it is sitting idle. Interest rates in this country are negative. There is not much enthusiasm to invest in the Japanese economy, and therefore Japanese companies have for the last 3 or 4 decades been looking at growth coming from external stimulation. It is no wonder therefore that one of the strongest supply chain network that Japan has is radiating out of the People's Republic of China. And it is nobody's case, even at a time of some kind of an indication of a slowdown in the Chinese economy. It is certainly not my case that Japan is likely to abandon China in favor of India or any other country. Please disabuse yourselves of this notion. The economic interface between Japan and China is so deep and mutually interdependent that it would be a very painful process for either to simply cut loose and row your boats away. Even if you have strategic problems, even if you have territorial issues. And these two are not linked in any case. For if territorial issues and strategic problems were an impediment, they wouldn't have arrived at such an interdependent, mutually beneficial economic partnership between Japan and China. And if the absence of problems were to result in the converse being true, by now we should have had that relationship with Japan as against China having that relationship. So these things can coexist. Having strategic problems, having territorial disputes, and having engagement, having hedging with others, all these are parallel strands in global diplomacy and strategic thinking that coexist. And therefore today, the key point here is that Japan is looking at creating alternatives in order to have what you might describe as risk mitigation strategy. Globally, it is a fact that many of the well-known engines of global growth have slowed down. Much of the action has shifted in the last 20 years to the Asia-Pacific, notably because of China, but not only because of China. There are other economies in this region that are also growing rapidly, partly also because about 60% of the global population lives in Asia. And this global population, 60% or more, has been exposed to about 6% or more growth rates over the last decade or more. And this is likely to continue because the world is moving at different levels. There are technologies and manufacturing processes where the labor cost of arbitrage matters. And you've seen that such industries have shifted to the Asia-Pacific, to countries which could provide that kind of an advantage. There are other technologies where these are not dependent on human beings, and those will continue to be in those advanced engines of economic growth that are also seeking to revive their own fortunes and future, be it Europe or be it the United States. India also feels that its moment has come. Under the dynamic leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, we have executed a number of far-reaching reforms, some of which may be painful, some of which are like the palliative, which needs a little time to take effect, like the GST reforms and things like that. They had to be done. If you want to move over into the next sort of phase of economic growth and really compete at 7, 8, 9, 10%, it could not have been done without some painful decisions. Even so, Japan has now emerged as India's largest single country investor. I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but in the last 2 years, a complete transformation has taken place. Japan, which was lagging behind countries like the UK, Korea and others in terms of its annual investment flow into India, has suddenly emerged as the #1 single country investor at $4.7 billion is where we ended the year 16-17. And that was a quantum jump from $2.6 billion in the previous year. So that's an 80% jump. It's very unusual. And one might be tempted to say, is it episodic? Is it temporary? Is it because of some 1 or 2 or 3 big deals? Is it here to stay? I'm convinced that it is here to stay because it is prolific, it is across the board. The Japanese have realized the long-term potential of India as well, not just the short-term potential. They realize that India offers not only the demographic dividend, also offers a democratic setup, and of course the third D of the huge demand of the local market. Japan also realizes that if it wants to revive its own fortunes through creation of such other supply chains in Asia and beyond Asia to Africa, India can play an integral role in this strategy. In connectivity in Southeast Asia, which Japan regards as a very key and strategic sort of area of influence and sphere of influence for Japan, traditionally so, especially the maritime flank of Southeast Asia. Japan also feels that if it combines its concept of free and open Indo-Pacific strategy or the Asia-Africa growth corridor strategy or its enhanced partnership for quality infrastructure, this is another mouthful that they use in regard to their own vision of connectivity infrastructure in Southeast Asia. In all of this, they can combine with our own efforts to cut the alignment from our side through our Act East policy, through our own interest, cultural, economic and political that we have in that strategic part of the world that is the ASEAN. Beyond that, they are aware of the fact that India can be a platform for manufacturing if they want to start selling in Africa. And so these tandems can emerge which can be mutually beneficial in other parts of the world, including in Africa, in the Indian Ocean region, by combining our strengths, India's and Japan's. It is in this broad context, therefore, that JBIC surveys, the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, their surveys for Japanese manufacturing companies in regard to their prospects and outlook for overseas operations have consistently ranked India over the years, financial years 14, 15 and 16 as the #1 medium-term destination for FDI from Japan. It is only in 2017, last week, I think on the 21st or the 22nd of November, their latest report was released and one might say, oh, India has slipped to #2 position. It's true. But it's only marginally so because with a very high approval rating, India has now slipped back behind China. And China has once again re-emerged as the #1 preferred destination, partly because of the far-reaching reforms that we have carried out, the immediate slowdown that we have seen in the temporary slowdown that we have seen in the Indian economy. And to say that, oh, India slipped to 2nd position is a piece of dire and bad news is a very, very myopic way of looking at things, because we are up there with China as one of the 2 top destinations with approval ratings almost the same as China. I should also tell you that Japan is today, therefore, one of the biggest players in the Indian economy. It is present in virtually every large infrastructure project in India. I don't have to tell you, your professors would have told you, you would have read about it, that India's, now talking to Japan, we have signed the agreement to bring the Shinkansen, for instance, between Mumbai and Ahmedabad. The Delhi Metro is a very successful example of Japanese technology and processes. A number of other metros around the country, and so many of them are now looking at Japan as a potential partner. We have the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the dedicated freight corridor. There are Japan industrial townships coming up. If Prime Minister Abe's recent visit in September is anything to go by, then the future is very, very optimistic. During that visit, it's not just the symbolic aspect of there being such a wonderful relationship between our two leaders, the fact that the people of Gujarat, the people of India warmly welcomed him, but the substantive part is also very noticeably present in every summit. 15 MOUs and agreements were signed during this particular summit meeting, which incidentally is an annual meeting of the type that we do not have with other countries. It is not with every country that we have a prime ministerial visit incoming and outgoing every year. So this is something that gives us a great deal of confidence in our what we call the special strategic and global partnership. Every word here is potent with meaning. Prime Minister Abe has also said this on a number of occasions, that a robust India is in Japan's interest, a robust Japan is in India's overall interest. Prime Minister Modi has said on more than one occasion that there is no other country that has played such a fundamental role in the economic transformation of India as has Japan, and no other country is likely to play such a role in the achievement of India's aspirations and transformation as will Japan in years to come. So it is quite obviously the relationship to watch out for in the 21st century. We at the political level have a great deal of toing and froing. Virtually every week we have a ministerial delegation from some state in India visiting here, or some prefectural delegation going from here. The good thing is that now this relationship, which always had great potential, is now broad-based. The stakeholders in India have multiplied. And I would say that Professor Raghuram is also a very big stakeholder, because he came here last time with this wonderful idea of opening up a Japan Study Center. I wholeheartedly welcomed it, and we exchanged a few thoughts and ideas on how to take it forward. I do hope this can be replicated elsewhere. And so today I also want to acknowledge the fact that you have managed to get it off the ground. I congratulate you for that very far-reaching and thoughtful decision. I believe you had your foundation day celebrated recently, and that you invited my counterpart, Ambassador Hiramatsu, to come and address you there. So that's a wonderful beginning. I think this could be done elsewhere as well with your help. I mentioned it to Shri Pankaj Bhai Patel in September in person. Over a cup of tea, I told him that we need to do the same thing in IIM Ahmedabad. Not in a competitive sense, but in terms of bringing together a convergence in... no, he probably has his partial loyalty towards that institution, given the fact that he was there for many years. You're a familiar face there. But we need to do more of this. We need to do more of Japan-centric courses, familiarization courses around the country. The one good thing I want to tell you in our bilateral relations that's happening, which never happened before, is the fact that this country has an aging population. You're aware of the fact that about 300,000 Japanese are, sort of moving out of the population numbers every year, and so therefore it's a declining population, it's an aging population. They have had for many years something called the Technical Intern Training Program. When I came here 2 years ago, I was astounded to see that India was not participating in it. Now, fundamentally speaking, what is the Technical Intern Training Program? It is not an internship. It is a full-fledged job opportunity for young professionals, qualified professionals, to come from different parts of the world and to stay and work in Japan, contribute to the economy for anything between 3 to 5 years to up to 7 years. And to my mind, the best part of it all is that after that they go back to their countries. So when I came here, the thought struck me that if we could get India, with our youthful resources, with our desire to emerge as the world's largest reservoir of human resources to power the global economy, we should be here. By my calculation in the TITP, and by published figures, there were 44,000 Vietnamese, 34,000 Chinese, there were 24,000 Filipinos, there were 15,000 Indonesians, and there were 58 Indians. Now, I cannot take solace from the fact that there are 58 Indians as against 13 from Pakistan. That's not my benchmark. My benchmark is our assessment of our own capabilities and the fact that we can do a much better job here through our young professionals than anybody else in the world. And so therefore, 2 years of hard work, and we have finally managed to get Mr. Pradhan here. The Honorable Minister came, Minister of Skills Development and Entrepreneurship, and of course Petroleum and Natural Gas. And on both those accounts we signed an agreement finally. And so now we are in the business of firming up more of identification of sending organizations on the Indian side, receiving organizations on this side. And my dream is to see that in the next 5 to 10 years we can get vast numbers, maybe 5, 10, 20, 30,000 Indians here. If the Vietnamese can do it, so can we. Laos has 500 professionals working here in Japan. The point is that we, my team and I, we are obsessed with this, and we chip away on a daily basis. The other dream that has also been partially realized is the fact that we need to involve Japan in our skills development programs. Now, skill development, as you all know, is the buzzword in India. How are we going to do it? We can do it ourselves, or we can do it with the help of others. If you have to choose others as partners, who would you choose? I mean, everybody is choosing Japan. They have the best SOPs, they have the best discipline, they have the best integrity, and also a capacity to help others pro bono without trying to hardwire everything for strategic ends. And so it is that the thought struck us that we should ask every Japanese company, and there are 1,305 companies in India today, investing, as I told you, in line with that trend which is going northwards, that can you, when you're setting up your big factories there, can you also, say, set up a small skills development center? How much will it cost you? If you do it in areas where there are rich human resources, and if we also implant, say, a Japanese engineering course or two in some regional engineering colleges, and you work in tandem with that regional engineering college, and you set up a skills development center, you will have a rich inflow of trainees, inductees who will be in tune with Japanese way of thinking, manufacturing, production methodology, etc. And so again, with an effort of about 2 years, we finally managed to get 4 off the ground. During Prime Minister Abe's visit, you might have read that Suzuki, Yamaha, Toyota and Daikin have actually set up these, what we now call the JIMS, Japan India Institutes of Manufacturing. The idea is to train young people in Japanese manufacturing, production technologies and processes over the next 10 years. And we have also succeeded in bridging the other gap, which is language training. So the alignment has to cut as we would on a strategic road from multiple angles. If you are building a road in the mountain, you don't cut from one side. You cut from several angles and try and meet up somewhere. The idea is to train our people here as professionals. They will come for short term under the TITP and go back, carry that wealth of knowledge with them. The idea is to train even larger numbers in India through the gyms. You get bigger bang for the buck in India. You don't have to spend money to come all the way to Japan. You can train the trainers, and the trainers will then train more trainers, and you can populate the Indian economy with these good practices, best practices. So that's the second plank of that strategy. And the third one is that with Japan, if you want to do anything, you need language skills. So why don't you take a page out of the book of the Philippines, Vietnam, China, and encourage our people to learn the Japanese language. And therefore, during this visit, we also signed an agreement whereby Japan has agreed to help India set up Japanese language training departments and courses in 100 institutions of higher learning, which will churn out 1,000 Japanese language trainers in the next 5 years. And anyone who wants to be a stakeholder in this is also welcome. So we want to do it in a consultative way. We want to get it off the ground as quickly as possible. Our shared values, Buddhism, the fact that we have no bilateral issues, the fact that we even share our deities like Saraswati, Lakshmi, Shiva, Ganesh, all these are also greatly valued parts of their temples, and all this makes for a wonderful relationship. I'll stop here. I hope you did not mind my speaking at length. I've just shared a few rambling thoughts with you. The sole purpose was to stimulate your thinking, to get you to think about Japan, about larger matters in a broader context. It's not just a visit. From this visit you will take back, as Swami Vivekananda said, some wonderful ideas which can be used in our country. Thank you very much.